So I'm just going to launch into it here. So in 2017, I co-illustrated this large illustration called Waterways in order to help communicate the larger story of the impacts of fracking in the Mid-Atlantic region. And me and my collaborator have trained numerous people to utilize this illustration through workshops, games, and presentations to lead groups in exploring the multifaceted story that is tucked into this detailed illustration. So I'm going to use parts of this piece in order to tell you about the history and the story of fracking. And I won't be covering absolutely everything about fracking, but some of the main points. Okay, so what is fracking and why does it matter? First off, I'm going to be referring to Pennsylvania and other colonialist place names, but I want to acknowledge that this land historically was cared for and occupied by the Lenape people. And these place names that I'll be using have only been in use, obviously, for the last few hundred years. So fracking is the process in which people drill into the earth to extract natural gases and liquids. In what we call Pennsylvania, we have two rock formations that are fracked: the Marcellus Shale, which is primarily what I'll be talking about, and the Utica Shale. The Marcellus Shale is located between 200 and 2,000 feet below ground and was originally formed 256 million years ago from organisms like what we've drawn here, which are trilobites and crinoids. People use fracked gas and liquids to create plastics, cook their food, heat their homes, and sometimes to fuel cars. The main gases and liquids that are coming up from the Marcellus Shale are methane, propane, ethane, and butane. And there are some other gases that come up too. But specifically, when methane is released into the atmosphere, it is 86 times more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So it warms the atmosphere at astronomical rates. This is a map of some of the natural gas industry's infrastructure across Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has lots of Marcellus Shale rock formation, which is primarily located in the southwest, northwest, north, and northeast of Pennsylvania. So the infrastructure you see located in the southeast of Pennsylvania is for transporting, storage, processing, and exporting. Pennsylvania is the biggest exporter of natural gas in North America. So how does fracking actually work? Looking at the drawing on your left, you see a drill rig, storage containers, trucks, little bulldog construction workers, a flare stack, and wastewater containment pond directly next to a tiny little playground and a farm with an angry chicken and her cows and pigs. Fracking is often within really close proximity to schools and residential areas. At the bottom left, you can see the layers of the earth like the layers of a cake. The drill well extends down past the water table. The well is made out of metal and concrete, which is eventually always corrodes and leaks, putting the water table at risk. And this source of water is often the only source of water for residents in rural Pennsylvania. Once a drill goes into the Marcellus Shale, it turns at that 90-degree angle like an L and continues drilling for up to a mile through that shale rock. A toxic slurry of water, sand, and over 300 other chemicals is shot down the well at extremely high pressure and fracks or cracks the shale, which is a really thin, flaky rock. And the sand props open fissures within that flaky rock, and the natural gases escape and they rush up the well along with about half of that toxic slurry, except the other half is never recovered. Natural gas and oils are highly explosive and volatile, as you can see in the photo. This is just one of many examples of well explosions. And once an explosion turns into a natural gas fire, it cannot be extinguished the way that we would extinguish normal fires. In order to stop a gas fire, the source must be cut off and the gas has to burn itself off. So well fires have lasted for up to 2 weeks at a time. This process of horizontal drilling for fracking became used often in the 70s, but wasn't able to boom into the huge industry it is today until 2006, when the Halliburton loophole was put into place. This exempted the oil and gas industry from the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, which, as you can imagine, is really problematic. So after the gases are extracted from the ground, they are transported by pipeline, train, and truck, and these often get the nickname of pipe bomb, bomb train, and truck bomb because of their track record of explosions. In order to liquefy the gases for transport, natural gas is chilled to an extremely cold temperature and compressed to 1/600th the volume of the original gaseous state. So that means that if any of these gets a leak or has an accident, the liquid can explode to 600 times its liquid size very, very quickly, like a bomb. The bottom left image is of a pipeline explosion and fire in Texas. What happened there was a dredging vessel hit a submerged natural gas pipeline, sparking an explosion, and 6 workers went to the hospital and 4 other people went missing and are presumed dead because their bodies were never found. The bottom right image is of the pipeline explosion on 8th Street in South Philadelphia in December of 2019, where 2 people died and 2 homes were flattened after a natural gas transmission line was hit while Philadelphia Water Department was doing maintenance work. And a transmission line, for those of you who don't know, is just the pipeline that goes from the main gas line on the street into the individual houses. So the refining, storing, and exporting of natural gas often occurs in low-income Black and brown neighborhoods. These industrial facilities add to already overburdened pollution levels, leading to serious health problems. So on the left here, you can see a drawing of some of the infrastructure we have in and around Philadelphia. The liquefied natural gas, which is again like 1/600th the size of the gaseous state, there are facilities that process and store and export these LNGs, liquefied natural gases. So we have one in Port Richmond, right around the corner from me. It's like where I take my walks during the day, which is a storage facility, it's a processing plant, and it's an export terminal. There is a storage facility in Southwest Philly, which is in the middle of being proposed to become a processing facility. And there is another space in Gibbstown, New Jersey that is proposed as a new storage facility and export terminal. That's in Gibbstown, New Jersey, and it's just north of Chester on the Jersey side of the Delaware River. So all of these facilities have super choking air pollution around them and an increased train and truck traffic in the surrounding neighborhoods. Marcus Hook, which I've drawn down there, I only drew like one tiny little house as Marcus Hook, but it's a very big and important neighborhood. It's just south of Philly, and it has a newly renovated natural gas liquids hub where they store millions of barrels of propane, ethane, and butane that come out of the pipelines that come across Pennsylvania. At Marcus Hook, along with the Port Richmond LNG plant, they dock enormous ships called dragon ships, which take the natural gases across seas to European markets. One of the largest natural gas companies that we have here in Philly is Energy Transfer Partners, ETP, which is the parent company of Sunoco. They have had their business legally labeled as a public utility because they originally dealt with gasoline, and their pipelines and other infrastructure was built in order for American residents to use that gasoline. This was for the good of the people. And so any permits that they requested for building infrastructure, they got through all the permitting processes because they had that public utility label. However, once they started working in natural gas, they were able to keep that public utility label. But the difference now is that they're exporting that natural gas that was drilled in Pennsylvania and selling it to European markets or Chinese markets for their use instead of ours. So it's not for our public good, but under our laws, that should mean that they're not a public utility. However, people who have brought that up in court have not been able to use that. Like, it's not been acknowledged in court. So ethane's another one of the byproducts of fracking. Ethane molecules can be cracked apart in places called cracker plants. They crack molecules apart in order to create plastics. And so I'm not going to go into the deep impacts of the plastic pollution, but it's also one of the economic reasons that we are still having fracking happening. So if this is so bad, how could it happen? The very short version. So we have this little baby bird nest being fed coins by robot birds. And this illustrates the one-to-one ratio of oil and gas industry lobbyists to state representatives. And there's no cap to the amount of money that lobbyists can give to state reps. Below that, we have a scene where they're at the very bottom of that scene is a very confused little mole who is working the land, but he's presented with a lease to lease his land to the fracking industry. And we have some industry bullies there telling him that it's a really good industry and that there's jobs in it. And these leases are really confusing and people often sign them without understanding how harmful it really is. On the bottom right, we have a defunded EPA illustrated as a skeleton of an eagle. The EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency, and they aren't able to do too much because they're so defunded. And so they do whatever the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission does. And they basically just rubber stamp every permit that crosses its desk. And then at the top right, Governor Wolf defends fracking. So how do we fight back? People have been fighting fracking since its inception, but more intensely over the past 15 years since the Halliburton loophole went through. So one of the most important things we can do is act in solidarity with those most affected if it's not ourselves. We can educate our community and our family, attend protests and rallies, pray and support people on the front lines in the ways that they're requesting it. There's also a movement growing right now to give legal rights to nature. If corporations can have legal personhood, like why can't a river? It needs to like grow and thrive and be healthy. And I think one of the most effective things to do is to take direct action, such as breaking into facilities and stopping the production ourselves. So on the left, I have a map of the Delaware River Basin because this past Thursday, as you might know, the Delaware River Basin Commission voted to permanently ban fracking within this area, which provides drinking water to more than 13 million people, which is a huge landmark and definitely worth winning. And it's also important to note the hypocrisy within the win. The government of Pennsylvania just publicly acknowledged that fracking cannot be done safely and threatens the health of everyone and everything in its way. They used information that was gathered from across the whole state about the harms of fracking, but only decided to protect one portion of it. And this is the portion that has seen the least amount of harms because we already had a temporary ban on fracking here in the Delaware River Basin. But so all that to say, like the Allegheny River, the Ohio River, Susquehanna, Erie, and Potomac River basins should all be as protected as the Delaware, and obviously everywhere else in the world too. Like they should not be sacrifice zones for the industry to profit from, but then like get a pat on the back for protecting New York City and Philadelphia and everybody in between. So the fight doesn't end here. So the graphic on the right is one that I designed for an anti-pipeline campaign in central Pennsylvania in 2017. I created the design on the left for the Seneca Nation, who a couple years ago won their campaign to stop a fracking wastewater treatment plant from being built upstream from their ancestral lands along the Allegheny River. On the right, I created this illustration for a magazine article about the incineration, which ties into fracking because of how much plastic fracking creates and ends up at the Chester incinerator. And this is just a group photo I was a part of called Edge Philly, and we're doing a solidarity action against the refinery in Southwest Philly. But that's it. Thanks for listening.